One way in which we're really excited about AI as we use it at TeachFX is we want it to strengthen the teacher-student relationship. We want to use AI to look at student discourse patterns and give teachers feedback that help them engage students more deeply, right? Because we know that teacher-student relationship is so powerful for student learning. I grew up with educators in the family. My grandma was an educator. My mom was an educator. And so I always saw education as this really powerful means for social mobility. And this is incredibly powerful data because it really does get to the root causes of some of the inequities in education, which is who's doing the talking in the classroom. You know, those who participate more learn more.
Hello, my name is Kate and I'm your host for this week's episode of the Teens and AI podcast. Today we're talking about AI and voice recognition technology, something that's massively grown in reach over the past 5 years. It's now predicted that there will be 8 billion voice-based devices around the world by 2023. There's a great Forbes article by Nina Achadjian which points out the way in which, although we had things like MSN Messenger about 20 years ago, it's only recently that platforms like Slack have taken this more personal style of messaging and transformed the workplace so that we communicate less by email and more through text. Which leaves me wondering, how long will it take for voice technology to move from being just used in our personal lives with voice assistants like Siri, Alexa, and Google to being widely used in the working world? The founders of TeachFX were featured in Forbes 30 Under 30 last year for working on exactly that transfer, as they incorporate voice AI into the world of teaching. I spoke to Zach Crago, co-creator and head of partnerships at the company, about the potential this tool holds and the ways in which it can be positively used to individualize feedback. I hope you enjoy. Thank you so much, Zach, for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
So I wonder whether we could just start by you telling us a bit about what TeachFX does, how it got to where it is today, and also how you got involved with the organization.
Absolutely. So TeachFX is a professional learning company that seeks to create more engaging and equitable classrooms around the world. We can do that with an app that uses voice AI to collect audio of classrooms, when teachers record their class, and then gives teachers really targeted feedback on student engagement patterns, on equity, on their talk ratio, on their lesson plan. And when we do this, when teachers do this, when they're empowered to collect evidence of instruction in their own classrooms, they radically change how they teach so that it is more engaging and more equitable. We have 60 plus partners around the world, and we're growing every day.
And how did you get involved with TeachFX?
So I got involved with TeachFX in grad school. So, my background is only tangentially in education as it happens. I grew up with educators in the family. My grandma was an educator. My mom was an educator. And so I always saw education as this really powerful means for social mobility, as a means to lift people up, advance their not just their careers, but their human potential, their sense of self and agency in the world. I ended up meeting the folks who created TeachFX in grad school at Stanford. And I've always been really motivated by that opportunity to unleash human potential, if you will. And one area in which we saw a really big opportunity to do this was in teacher professional learning. So many teachers get feedback that is not personalized to them, that is delivered in workshops that are too infrequent to seek change. And we just saw all of this unique technology in the Silicon Valley and the Bay Area that we thought we could apply to really change the paradigm of teacher professional learning and professional development from, one size fits all infrequent opportunities to really personalized, frequent, and objective feedback. I met the co-founders there and off we went.
And if I'm right in understanding your equitable learning program, it splits out the speech by ethnicity and demographic as well. So how does the technology behind that work?
Yeah, so we actually have two products that have been really popular. One is, I'd say, our main product, which is TeachFX, which is a tool that teachers use to record their classes and then automatically get that feedback that's personalized to their own instruction. It's really a teacher reflection tool. The second product is Equitable Classrooms. And Equitable Classrooms is a district or school leadership tool. Basically, when we're in the virtual classroom, when a school or district's in the virtual classroom, we can marry SIS data, that's student information system data, with TeachFX and Zoom data, for example, to actually figure out who is doing the talking and when, by whatever subgroup a school cares about, right? So it could be by race identified in the student information system. It could be by other learning groups, like whether they're English learners, for example. And this is incredibly powerful data because it really does get to the root causes of some of the inequities in education, which is, as Professor Rachel Lotan, one of our professors at Stanford, would say, who's doing the talking in the classroom? You know, those who participate more learn more. And now we can actually see through this unique opportunity we have in the virtual classrooms, which students exactly are getting the time to speak in class and which ones aren't.
And once you have that information for a teacher, how long does it typically take for engagement statistics to change?
Well, this is, I think, the most fascinating part. Oftentimes, teachers will change how they teach after their very first recording, because that's when you get the aha moment. So many teachers want to create more engaging learning experiences for their students and are often shocked to discover, holy cow, I talked to 90% of that class when really I thought I talked 30% of that class. So they immediately change how they look at instruction. And because the insights are not just based on the talk ratios themselves, but on other instructional strategies like the use of think time or think pair shares as an example, the app can also help teachers think about ways to improve those talk ratios over time. So a very common example we hear a teacher say is, well, shoot, I just didn't ask any open-ended questions this class. Or, for example, they might say, well, I asked open-ended questions, but I immediately continued talking after I asked. I never even gave students an opportunity to think about a response. So they look to improve their wait time or think time as an example. And when they do that, they see pretty immediate results with more student engagement and more equitable engagement too.
There's such a difference between kind of comprehension questions where you're just trying to guess what's in the teacher's head and articulating and thinking through your ideas. And one is so much more useful for life in the real world.
That's exactly right. And at the end of the day, that's what we want from our students.
And of course, every country's school system is different. But here in the UK, teachers often find that they have so much syllabus to get through before public exams, there simply just isn't time for classroom discussion. And I was just wondering what your thoughts on that are.
Well, we would challenge that perspective. Without a doubt, especially at the secondary level in junior high or high school, there are enormous pressures teachers are under to cover material, right? That is just not how the research says students learn. Students do not learn by teachers delivering lectures in front of the classroom and with students sitting quietly, supposedly absorbing the material, right? Some students do learn that way. And the fact is, those are the students who are gonna do fine no matter what the model of instruction is, right? So we're particularly looking at this through a lens of equity and saying, well, if the research says that's not how students learn, how do we cover this material in a way that's engaging for the students? And we would certainly say, as many of the standards in America outline with the next generation science standards, for example, that students have to be engaged in conversation about the material. You have to engage them in discourse, since, discourse is a way students process information, right? Like just talking is one way we think through things, right? And obviously when a student is talking, they're probably not sleeping, right? They're just more engaged by nature. And moreover, it's just an amazing way for teachers to figure out, hey, I'm sharing this new content. Do my students understand what I'm sharing? At a minimum, you should be asking, for them to to share their thinking, their responses, so you don't have to wait until a final exam to figure out if your students understand the material.
And on the topic of students sleeping, I was just wondering what the impact of COVID has been for TeachFX, because I imagine when remote teaching, anything that helps with student engagement is incredibly popular.
Well, the impact of COVID has had a really dramatic impact and a really divergent impact in education generally. Ed tech companies that have been focused on remote learning in some way, shape, or form have really benefited. And those that were really focused on the in-person classroom, for example, have really struggled. I will admit, we were really worried at the beginning of COVID when schools closed down, that with reason, teachers would not want to reflect on their instruction when instruction was something radically different in the virtual learning world. Teachers, parents, schools were overwhelmed in this new learning environment, just getting the technology running, getting their kids in class, in their virtual classes, and teaching in a totally new way. We thought that what would likely happen is teachers would pull back on that reflection, that teacher learning. What we discovered was the opposite. So many teachers wanted to be excellent teachers in this new learning environment. It was totally new for them. And so we put a really big focus on the professional learning that we provide to help teachers create those engaging and equitable learning experiences in the virtual learning environment. We also built an integration with Zoom and Teams, two of the most popular tools for synchronous instruction around the world, so that teachers could automatically get feedback on their instruction without even having to open the TeachFX app. And we have just been so heartened to see the thousands of teachers continuing to reflect and grow in their practice through these extremely challenging times when engagement truly is at an all-time low, and the need for more engaging, equitable classrooms as a result is at an all-time high.
So am I right in saying that the statistics from a teacher's lesson aren't shared with the school or their boss?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So when a teacher uses TeachFX, they're recording a class of their own, and that data, those insights that are surfaced for the teacher, are private to the teacher. And we do this for a really good reason. One is we never, ever, ever want TeachFX to be associated with school evaluations or anything punitive. We know that when you give teachers agency to record when they want, for example, and you give them space to reflect in a formative and private manner, they record a lot more and they reflect a lot more. And that's what drives change in teacher practice. We know that teachers have to lead their own learning and it can't be punitive. So we say always to every school partner, there is no administrator account. A teacher's recordings are theirs and theirs alone. And it can't be used in any sort of evaluative big brother type manner.
And I worked in a school, and I always thought of data as being something that allowed us to do the registers and send out the reports. But it's almost inevitable that moving forward, data won't solely be used for the kind of administrative work I remember it being about. So what would you say on a wider basis is the future of data in teaching, but also in the same vein, what's next for TeachFX?
Yeah, great questions. Data-informed instruction, data-driven practice these are buzzy words, buzzwords in education. And it's true, it's going to become a greater and greater part of teaching and learning as we enter the future. Generally, there's been a really big push towards data-informed instruction in the United States and around the world. Oftentimes, this is driven by, changes in federal or state standards, such as in the United States, that want more evidence-based practices in instruction, for example, and want to measure outcomes. Like, what happened? So you made these changes in instruction. Did we see changes in student outcomes? So often we lament the fact that this is very test-driven. It's very assessment-driven. And we oftentimes think that has the measurement all backwards, right? It's like, well, we're looking at the outputs of education, which is like these test scores, which are often very persistent. despite what we try to change, rather than looking at the inputs, like what did we do as teachers, as educators to change the outputs? One way in which we think TeachFX is very represents a paradigm shift is that we want to look at the inputs. What are the things those teachers are doing to change student outcomes? How can we reflect on what research says works in instruction? Asking those open-ended or authentic questions of students, for example, meaningfully engaging those students in discourse, especially your English learners, your students of color, your students from low-income families. And how can we reflect on that data to really drive changes in the outcomes we want? I think that's one big shift in data that we are really excited about pushing the field towards. Another big thing is, I think, around this whole idea of AI in general, right? Machine learning, artificial intelligence, it's all the rage and all the buzz. And you see it in so many aspects of education, whether it's in, helping teachers grade papers faster or whatever, right? So many of those things that we hear about, we think certainly can help teachers with aspects of their work. But oftentimes educators fear in general, that it's technology that gets between the teacher and the student relationship. One way in which we're really excited about AI as we use it at TeachFX is we want it to strengthen the teacher-student relationship. We want to use AI to look at student discourse patterns and give teachers feedback that help them engage students more deeply, right? Because we know that teacher-student relationship is so powerful for student learning. And so that's another way in which, at least here at TeachFX, we're trying to move the needle, move the conversation about data in education towards one that is truly student-centered.
And of course, voice recognition technology isn't only suitable for the classroom. And I'm just wondering, in which areas you think it will become more prominent in the future? And I guess also, how do we make the wider public feel comfortable with it?
Yeah, those are great questions that may be outside my pay grade. But, I think one thing that we've seen, at least in the classroom, that we know is really powerful, is when teachers are explicit with their students about the use of TeachFX as a means for getting the students more engaged, as a means of their own reflection and growth. And what I like about that is it's extremely transparent. Teachers will say things like, hey, students, I want to let you know that I'm using TeachFX. It's an artificial intelligence tool. It's like a coach in my pocket. It's to help me learn and grow and better engage you all. My goal is to hear you all do more talking than I'm doing talking. And so I hope you'll let me use this to reflect, and I'll encourage you all to engage with me in the learning here. It's great modeling for students. We want students to have that growth mindset, and there's no better way to demonstrate that and model it than tell your students, hey, I'm learning too, and I'm seeking to grow as well. I think that kind of transparency is really powerful, not just in the classroom, but outside of the classroom too. I certainly foresee that we will see elements of artificial intelligence and may already be experiencing elements of artificial intelligence in the ads we see and things of that nature all over. And voice, of course, is such a powerful tool because, if you think about the ways in which we can use machine learning to make decisions, to analyze data, to interact in our world, voice is just it's, I think, an underutilized medium so far, which is surprising because people talk a lot. We love to talk. We love to interact with each other. That's how we create meaning in many ways. And so I just foresee that we will see a lot more applications of voice AI in the future.
If TeachFX could partner with anyone in the world, who would it be?
I would love to, I'd love to partner with everyone, which is not a very strategic response. But, it's true that our vision is to empower teachers everywhere. And we have an app that can give every single teacher in the world feedback every single day, all at the same time. And that really is our mission. There are so many places, not just in the United States, but in the UK, in South America, in China, elsewhere, where we see this enormous opportunity. And oftentimes those are schools with the most diverse student populations, whether that is, the New York City Department of Education, the Los Angeles Unified School District, certainly schools across London, for example, and across the UK. That's where we see a really meaningful opportunity to make a big impact in student learning and equity. And so I would say schools that fit that profile, school districts, or other education organizations that fit that profile are a good fit.
And finally, TeachFX splits the proportion of classroom time into teacher speech, group work, student speech, silence. Mm-hmm. And my question is, which of these would you have contributed most to as a student yourself?
Probably silence. I feel very, I was really fortunate in some ways. I thought I did well at school. I took easy classes. I didn't challenge myself. I was the kind of kid who wanted to spend more time playing my guitar, skateboarding, and, talking with my friends about school crushes. I was not the kind of student who was hitting the books in the evening. That really changed my senior year of high school. I was taking a reading strategies course, which was strange because I loved to read on my own, always did my whole life. And one of my teachers intervened, took me out of class in the middle of the day. It's probably 6 weeks into the quarter. I thought I was in trouble, and that wouldn't have been a surprise. I got myself into trouble here and there. And, I said, what's going on? She said, well, you're bored stiff in my class, so I'm moving you to AP English, an honors level English course. And I was kind of shocked. I didn't know what to say or do. I moved into that AP English course and just saw a level of engagement and discussion and rigor that was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. And as it happens, I found the teacher to be kind of scary, but in a really appealing way. I really wanted to earn his affection in some ways. And for the first time, I was really motivated to learn. I was really challenged. And I think that changed everything for me. I realized, like, holy cow, maybe school has not been that exciting for me because I've not been challenged. Maybe, these teachers saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And I decided after that, shoot, I should take more AP classes. I should really apply myself. So the rest of my senior year, I took all AP classes. I ended up going into the honors program at my local college, and decided that senior year, in conversation with this teacher, that I would also try to go to a top graduate school program. And I was really lucky to do exactly that at Stanford. It just goes to show the power of teachers to change students' lives when they act to engage their students in meaningful, challenging, enriching conversation and discourse and content.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Teens in AI podcast, and thank you to Zach for speaking with us. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the podcast, so do get in touch with us via social media. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Teens in AI Pod. Tune in every Thursday for a new episode where we'll be speaking to more leading figures in the world of AI. In the meantime, thanks again for tuning in, and I hope you have a great day.